Hello everyone, welcome to my channel and to another video. If you're familiar with Bari Weiss and the band of, let's say, fearless intellectuals around here, you know that they really despise modern universities. They call them illiberal and dogmatic, where people can't hear challenging ideas, like that trans women aren't women, that systemic racism doesn't exist, and that Muslims and immigrants are posing a threat to the West. You know, such harmless ideas. If you read Bari Weiss's Substack, you will also find dozens of articles about how universities are anti-Semitic for allowing boycotts of Israel and general criticism. For a long time, I thought that complaining would be all that they were ever going to do, but hilariously, I was wrong. On the 8th of November, an article by former Catholic University St. John's College president Pano Canelos was posted to Bari Weiss's Substack. The title read, "We can't wait for universities to fix themselves, so we are starting a new one. A new university dedicated to the fearless pursuit of truth." Further, they write that there is a gaping chasm between the promise and the reality of higher education, and they say that illiberalism has taken hold. Then they go about their usual talk about how people with different views are receiving criticism and ostracization at universities, something that in many cases is very understandable when you do a minimum of research into what views those people actually espoused. After multiple paragraphs about this and some lip service to the actual issues, for instance skyrocketing tuition and student debt, they say that it's not just that we are failing students as individuals, we are failing the nation. Our democracy is faltering because our educational system has become illiberal. At some future point, historians will study how we arrived at this tragic past, and perhaps then we will have reformed our colleges and universities, restoring them as bastions of open inquiry and civil discourse. But we are done waiting, so we are building anew. They were actually doing it, as the combination of years of grifting, complaining, and hundreds of articles of wasted space online, the pro-free speech so-called enlightened centrists were actually launching a university, and they were quick to invoke a victim narrative around the project, as they always do. We expect to face significant resistance to this project. There are networks of donors, foundations, and activists that uphold and promote the status quo. There are students who demand it, along with even greater restrictions on academic freedom. But despite the efforts of the intolerant left, the brave thought criminals, as they label themselves, many of them, continue their fight to restore the meaning of those old school mottos. Light, truth, the wind of freedom. Then they post a link to the new University of Austin. Starting a university is all well and fine, but it can't be done solely on willpower. In order to employ professors, afford equipment, and build a campus, as the university has promised, they will need a lot of money. If you read their website, it says that they will be fiercely independent, both financially, intellectually, and politically. But what does that actually mean? Where does the money come from? Well, if we look a bit further, we find that the university is financially sponsored by a 501c3 called Cicero Research. But that is probably okay, right? They're independent, except from Cicero Research. When looking at Cicero Research's filing to the IRS, you will find that their mission is to recommend free market-based solutions to public policy issues and produce materials in order to further the quote, importance of preserving Texan policies, values, and history. It seems that a politically independent university has a pretty much not independent funding organization with a clear political agenda. Further down in the filings, we find that this organization will receive funding from the general public. And according to the interview that Canelos did with a Jewish insider, the public largely means wealthy donors. When asked who will support the product financially, Canelos responds, "The person who's given us the kind of runway here at the beginning is somebody who is on our board, Joe Lonsdale. We're in the process right now with 7 or 8 other lead donors." On the website, it says that they are not planning on receiving public funding at all, but are in the process of securing $250 billion. That is not little. So it becomes clear that the super independent, big brain, unrestrained by the system university is looking to be funded by billionaires. Joe Lonsdale, while not a billionaire, is for instance a venture capitalist. But it gets worse. In an article from the Washington Post, the writer quotes an op-ed by a member of the board of trustees at the University of Austin, who doesn't even try to hide his hunger for oligarch money. You can't start a real competitor to a major university on the cheap. At the same time though, America is an extremely rich country, with many great fortunes rising in the internet era. There are lots of potentially admirable and productive ways for internet tycoons to disperse their billions. But universities are the great power centers of science and industry and culture in our time. They're generally agreed to be in serious need of reinvention and reform, and it's a little peculiar that you don't see the new super rich trying to put their stamp on the meritocracy, that we don't yet have the Gates University or the Bezos Collegium. Not every rich donor has the Muskian or Bezosian capacity to start a university single-handedly, but even just the opportunity to help shape a new one seems worth more than the chance to become a rounding error to the multi-billion dollar endowments of the Ivy League. So, in conclusion, the university is planning on basing their funding on billionaires that will, as Niall Ferguson puts it, get a hand in shaping it. Seems pretty not independent, at least compared to publicly funded universities that don't have these massive strings attached. But apart from this money, the new freethinkers at Austin would also love the help of the general public, in the form of their hard-earned dollars of course, for their 100% not grift operation, even if you are not rich. So well, that's not too great, but if the university has anything going for it, it is the many galaxy brain individuals that are affiliated with it. These people are divided into the founding trustees and the board of advisors. Let's begin with some of the people in that last group. Glenn Lowry is a professor at Brown University and probably received his credentials in the anti-woke community due to a letter he wrote in response to a statement on the George Floyd protests by Brown University. He was angry, triggered if you will, that the leaders of the university pointed out that the criminal justice system and racism affected the death of another black man. Subsequently, he made an interview with Bari Weiss on her Substack, where he reiterated almost all of the conservative arguments on education and police. So that's him. And then we have Caitlin Flanagan, quite an intellectual, the author of this article about how the left is afraid of Jordan Peterson. Well, turns out that Jordan Peterson is a dumbfuck, a transphobe, a vaccine skeptic, and a vigilant anti-feminist, among many other things. In fact, he is utterly disqualified when it comes to commenting on societal matters at all. The fact that her Twitter bio says that she gives thought crimes for all occasions is also not good. That level of cringe is disqualifying even for advising a hack university. Then we have Joshua Katz, a Princeton professor who, apart from having written his own anti-SJW manifesto, has been accused of overstepping his professional boundaries with several female students. He will also be joining the board of advisors, and hopefully he will get some fresh blood among the conservative women, not as eager to call out sexual harassment when they see it. One of the most interesting people on the board of advisors has to be, however, Mr. Sohrab Ahmari. He isn't even an enlightened anti-SJW, but rather a full-on fundamentalist. His goal, as he writes in an article, isn't really free speech, but rather using free speech to further traditional Catholic orthodoxy, for instance on the topic of abortion. So, the Free Thinker University has actually brought in a full-fledged authoritarian. That's kinda interesting about whose speech they do allow and whose speech they don't and tell is authoritarian. The others are interesting too, but what they have in common is that they to some extent or another are casting themselves as free thinkers opposed to the orthodoxy of modern universities, and by virtue of them participating in this blatant cash grab that is the University of Austin, you could also label them grifters. Then there are the founding trustees, and here's where it gets interesting. Pano Cornelius we already covered, and he is a former president of a Catholic college. I didn't find much else to him. Then there is Heather Hying, and if you remember this name, it is probably because she, along with Professor Bret Weinstein, got famous after the Evergreen protests. She is also associated with the intellectual dark web, like the true philosophers, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, and Jordan Peterson. She is anti-trans, as is custom among the skeptics and anti-SJWs, and she doesn't want to take the COVID vaccine while instead using ivermectin like Joe Rogan, a real big brain intellectual. Further, we have Bari Weiss, a former New York Times op-ed staff editor who quit on her own while claiming that she was forced out. And she is also America's foremost warrior against cancel culture, at least now. When she was at NYU, she tried to cancel Palestinian professors when they said something critical of Israel, and she continues to label people anti-Semites left and right. My impression of her, frankly, is that she quite likes policing of speech and opinions, as long as she gets to be the inquisitor. Joe Lonsdale, the venture capitalist that gave the project startup money, is also on the board of founding trustees, of course. Last but not least, we have Niall Ferguson, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford and a senior faculty fellow at Harvard. Ferguson has many good reasons to be against the perceived cancel culture today. Let's look at Wikipedia and some of his views. This guy didn't only support the Iraq War and Western intervention in the Arab world as a self-described fully paid up member of the neo-imperialist gang. He also is a supporter of the Eurabia conspiracy, having written that the mass influx of refugees into Europe from Syria in 2015 was a modern version of the Volkerwanderung. For those who don't know what that was, it was when the Huns entered Europe, destabilized the continent, and then caused the downfall of Rome, the civilized realm. A really flattering comparison for the poor people fleeing for their lives from a war-torn Syria. But it doesn't end there. After the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, he said that France was a lost cause due to an unstoppable Islamic wave. He also saw the establishment of Islamic studies at his former college Oxford as the creeping Islamization of a decadent Christendom. These views of an Islamic takeover of Europe, this distinguished academic shares with, among others, the Norway terrorist Breivik and countless other far-right individuals and groups all over my continent. If you haven't already understood it from his Rome speak and his support for modern American intervention, this guy is also a massive imperialist. He supports the British Empire, saying that it is hard to make the case that the world would be a better place if the Europeans had stayed home, and he dismisses the collective guilt over empire, empire that oppressed people in the third world for literally hundreds of years, as self-flagellation. The fact that this kind of person is still affiliated with top universities is really astounding to me, and yet another example that cancel culture at universities is a hugely exaggerated concept. And I can see how a person with such demented views would want to associate with a free speech grift like the University of Austin. But hey, if you want to learn from these people, I'm not judging you. We should, however, look at what is on offer in terms of actual degrees, and if the university is officially recognized. Let's look at the frequently asked questions part of the website and the headline accreditation. Do you have accreditation is a question. The answer is, we are seeking accreditation, and that means no. It's as simple as that. Doesn't it take some universities a decade to receive accreditation is another question that's very reasonable. And the answer is, our conversations with our accredited partners leads us to believe that we have a much shorter time frame. Notice here that they do not provide information about what that time frame looks like, except saying that it will be under 10 years presumably. And they base this statement on conversations that they have had. Although they say they might have partnerships with accredited institutions, what they are basically saying is that they are not offering anything academically relevant for a long time. Do you offer degrees? We do not confer degrees at the moment. No, of course they don't, and probably they never will. What they do offer, however, is a summer program for college students, and it's called Forbidden Courses. It will focus on, quote, the most provocative questions that often lead to censorship or self-censorship in many universities. Knowing about some of the people associated with this project, we can basically imagine what those courses will be about. Further, they provide a timeline for what they will do, and this timeline should mean absolutely nothing to you. Because they are in the process of getting billionaire money, they're in the process of getting accreditation, and the physical manifestation of their university is currently just a house, which is better than a post box, but not much more. In my humble opinion, this university, in massive quotation marks, reminds me very much of another prominent university online. Maybe they should consider a merger. I can't wait for Bari Weiss against a blue background, explaining to me how Israeli bombs are the more humane in the world. In conclusion, this university is an obvious grift, not by accident, not because some part of the plan is flawed, not because of the bringing in of certain people. The grift is in the very DNA of this project, from its pretentious announcement letter and the various lofty statements from its affiliates, to the unrelenting quest for billionaire money, and of course the fact that this thing is a congregation of the biggest individual grifters, cringe merchants, crybabies and persecution complex havers of the American public life, coming together for one enormous grift. For students, there is exactly nothing on offer, and when the dust is settled and the cash is grabbed, nothing good will have come out of the University of Austin. This will be an utter shit show, and it will be much fun watching this bizarre story in the coming months. Thank you for watching my video. If you liked the video, consider subscribing and ringing the bell to get notified about my latest videos. It would mean a lot for the channel. Thank you very much.